Hello everybody and welcome back once again to DHK. The previous lesson was all about the accusative case, which I assume you now understand really well. To understand the dative case, which we're going to cover in this lesson, you need to be perfect with accusative. Before starting the lesson, I would like to let you know that we now have our own website on www.dhkedu.com. Do check it out. It is a single platform that enables you to watch any lesson as well as attempt the test on it at the same time. You can scroll through the lessons and tests seamlessly. We have created it with the intention of making your life easy and are also going to add exciting features and options to it soon. So do check it out, but for now, let's start the lesson. We only have two new nouns today, das Auto meaning car and der Brief meaning letter. Just to be clear, by letter I mean a written letter that you send someone and not the letter in an alphabet. The plural form of das Auto is die Autos and that of der Brief is die Briefe. We have quite a few verbs today. Sehen means to see. Ich sehe, du siehst, sie sieht, wir sehen, ihr seht, sie sehen. Treffen means to meet. Ich treffe, du triffst, sie trifft, wir treffen, ihr trefft, sie treffen. Geben means to give. Ich gebe, du gibst, sie gibt, wir geben, ihr gebt, sie geben. Helfen means to help. Ich helfe, du hilfst, sie hilft, wir helfen, ihr helft, sie helfen. Danken means to thank. Ich danke, du dankst, sie dankt, wir danken, ihr dankt, sie danken. Antworten means to answer or to reply to. Ich antworte, du antwortest, sie antwortet, wir antworten, ihr antwortet, sie antworten. Schicken means to send. Ich schicke, du schickst, sie schickt, wir schicken, ihr schickt, sie schicken. As we already know, the sentence is made of three parts: the subject, the verb, and the complements. In the previous lesson, we discussed the use of personal pronouns and common nouns as direct objects in a sentence. Today, we are going to learn how to use personal pronouns and common nouns as indirect objects in a sentence. As we saw last time, a noun or pronoun that is directly linked to the verb is called the direct object. I am selling the dress to her. The dress is the direct object here. She is giving him the notebooks. The notebooks is the direct object here. They are telling the students a story. Here, a story is the direct object. The direct objects need not necessarily be positioned right next to the verb. If you did not understand why the notebooks and a story are the direct objects in these examples, watch the previous lesson L9 accusative before you continue with this one. A noun or pronoun that receives the direct object and is indirectly linked to the verb through the direct object is called the indirect object. In order to correctly identify indirect objects in a sentence, you need to be able to understand the difference between direct and indirect objects, which I clearly explained in the previous lesson. In simple words, the something or someone that is itself being verbed is the direct object. The someone or something to whom or to which the first something or someone is being verbed is called the indirect object. I am selling the dress to her. Since the dress is itself being sold, it is the direct object. The girl to whom I am selling the dress is the indirect object, and hence her is the indirect object in this sentence. She is giving him the notebooks actually means that she is giving the notebooks to him. In this case, the notebooks is the direct object and him is the indirect object. They are telling the students a story is similar to the previous sentence and actually means that they are telling a story to the students. In this case, a story is the direct object and the students is the indirect object. Just like the last lesson where we learned that the subject of the sentence always uses the nominative case and the direct object of the sentence uses the accusative case, the indirect object of a sentence always uses the dative case. In English, nouns use the same form in both the accusative and dative cases and are distinguished by the order in which they are used in a sentence or by adding words such as to and for before the dative nouns that help in indicating the object's indirectness to the verb. German is a lot more straightforward compared to this. There is a fixed way of using nominative, accusative and dative in a sentence. So as we already know, the nominative personal pronouns in German are ich, du, es, sie, wir, ihr, sie, sie. And the nominative articles are der, die, das, and ein, einer, ein for masculine, feminine, and neutral nouns respectively. Die is the nominative definite article for plural nouns. And as we saw in the last lesson, the accusative personal pronouns are mich, dich, ihn, es, sie, uns, euch, sie, sie. Masculine articles der and ein become den and einen in the accusative case, but all the other articles remain exactly the same. I hope that is absolutely clear to you. In the dative case, on the other hand, all the personal pronouns and articles are different from the nominative case. Ich becomes mir, du becomes dir, becomes ihm, es also becomes ihm, sie becomes ihr, wir becomes uns, ihr becomes euch, sie becomes ihnen, and capital Z becomes capital ihnen. Just like capital Z, the first letter of ihnen is capital, but I'm going to refer to it as capital ihnen just to make life easy. In case of articles, der becomes dem, ein becomes einem, die becomes der, einer becomes einer, das becomes dem, ein becomes einem. The plural article die becomes den in the dative case, similar to the masculine definite article in the accusative case. Before moving on with how to use dative in a sentence, I would like you to know something. In German, it is sometimes uncommon to use pronouns for non-living things, especially when there may be confusion as to which of the nouns from the sentence it would actually represent. Usually, the whole noun is used repetitively wherever you would use a pronoun. So if computer is the direct object, the accusative case would be ihn, or simply den computer. In English, if you were talking about a computer, you would refer to it as it, since it is non-living. All non-living things are considered to be neutral nouns in English. But in German, as you know, it doesn't work like that. The computer is masculine, so it's der computer and not das computer. So when you talk about the computer, you don't say it, you say he or him in German. That is the reason why the accusative case for the computer is ihn instead of es. It may sound weird to you, but it's just how it is. The correct pronoun to use for der computer is ihn or im in the nominative, accusative, or dative cases respectively, regardless of how weird it actually sounds to you. But most people like to just reuse the nouns instead of using weird sounding pronouns. So instead of using er, in, or im for a non-living thing like a computer, one would normally directly say der computer, den computer, or dem computer. Same applies for feminine nouns that are non-living. One would more commonly use the noun die banana, or der banana, instead of using the pronouns sie, or ihr representing the banana. For living things, however, both the personal pronouns and the nouns are very common, and they even sound right to English speakers. So der Mann can be replaced with the personal pronouns er, in, im, or the nouns der Mann, den Mann, dem Mann. Similarly, die Schwester can be replaced with the personal pronouns sie, ihr, or the nouns die Schwester, der Schwester, without second thoughts. For neutral German nouns, the use of both the pronouns and the nouns, that is es, ihm, and das, dem, is common regardless of whether the noun is living or non-living. Also, even though using er, in, ihm, and sie, ihr for non-living things is uncommon, it is not incorrect. I will personally be absolutely okay with you using pronouns for non-living things as long as you're using them right. If the sentence has the correct meaning, I have no problem with it whatsoever. At the end of the day, it's about being able to be understood from what you say, and as long as you get that done, I will be okay with it. The dative case is most often accompanied by the accusative case, just like English, but there are also sentences that only use the dative case, as we will see soon. In English, you can say she sells him the computer as well as she sells the computer to him. So even if you swap the order of the direct and the indirect object in the sentence, it does not make it wrong. However, unlike English, the order in which you use the accusative and dative cases in a particular sentence is fixed in German. The direct object can either be a noun or a pronoun. The indirect object can also either be a noun or a pronoun. So there can be 4 combinations. To explain these combinations, I am going to use the following example. A girl named Nina is selling a computer to a man. From what we have learned so far, we can now identify the subject, the direct object, and the indirect object in this example. Here, Nina is the subject, the computer is the direct object, and the man is the indirect object. The first combination is where the direct object is a noun, and the indirect object is also a noun. Nina verkauft dem Mann den Computer, which means Nina sells the computer to the man. In this case, the indirect object will come first, and the direct object will be second. The second combination is where the direct object is a noun and the indirect object is a pronoun. Nina verkauft ihm den Computer, meaning Nina sells him the computer. Den Computer is a noun and ihm is a pronoun. This case is similar to the first case. The indirect object comes first and the direct object comes second. The third combination is where the direct object is a pronoun and the indirect object is a noun. Nina verkauft ihn dem Mann literally means Nina sells him to the man. Here, him meaning the computer. So in English, it actually means Nina sells it to the man and not Nina sells him to the man. In this case, the direct object ihn comes first, and it is then followed by the indirect object, which is dem Mann. The fourth combination is where the direct object is a pronoun and the indirect object is also a pronoun. Nina verkauft ihn ihm, which means Nina sells it to him. Just like case 3, here the direct object comes first and it is then followed by the indirect object. If you look closely, you will notice that this order solely depends on the direct object. As a conclusion, whenever the direct object is a noun, the indirect object gets the priority, regardless of whether the indirect object is a noun or a pronoun. And when the direct object is a pronoun, the direct object itself gets the priority, regardless of whether the indirect object is a noun or a pronoun. Here are some examples just to give you a better idea of using accusative and dative in sentences. Paul gibt mir ein Buch, meaning Paul gives me a book. Das Buch ist sehr gut. Wir verkaufen es Ihnen. It means the book is very good. We are selling it to you. Here, Ihnen is capital, so it represents the capital Z, which is a respectful way of saying you to single or multiple persons. Schreibt Karl einen Brief, meaning he is writing a letter to Karl. Lisa hat eine Schwester und sie schreibt ihr einen Brief. Sie schickt übermorgen den Brief. Meaning Lisa has a sister and she is writing a letter to her. She is sending the letter the day after tomorrow. There is also a rule to position adverbs correctly with direct and indirect objects, as we will see on the next slide. Der Mann zeigt ihnen die Lampe, means the man shows them the lamp. Das Geschwister zeigt einem Student das Auto, meaning the sibling shows the car to a student. The keyword for this lesson is Auto. To know more about keywords, watch our introductory lesson. Der Junge zeigt uns einen Fußball, meaning the boy shows us a football, or the boy is showing us a football. As I said before, adverbs follow a simple rule in order to position themselves in a sentence that has a direct object and indirect object, or both. In L5, we learned about adverbs of time and manner, and also the order of priority in which they are used if they both exist in the same sentence. That is, the adverb of time comes first and adverb of manner comes second. Back then, we positioned the set of adverbs right after the verb and before other complements in general. Well, that was only if there is no direct or indirect object in the sentence. Now that you know about direct and indirect objects, adverbs don't always get placed right after the verb. The first part of this rule is that adverbs will almost always follow indirect objects. The second part of the rule depends on whether the direct object is a noun or a pronoun. If the direct object is a noun, then the direct object follows the adverbs. So first comes the indirect object, or the dative case, then come the adverbs, and then comes the direct object or the accusative case. If the direct object is a pronoun, then as we already know, the direct object is followed by the indirect object. And the first part of this rule says that adverbs will always follow the indirect object. So the order in that case is as follows. First comes the direct object, or the accusative case, then comes the indirect object, or the dative case, and then comes the set of adverbs. Although I have used only one adverb, übermorgen, which is an adverb of time in this example, there could be multiple adverbs at the same position. The order within the set of adverbs remains the same as what we had seen in L5, that is, the adverb of time comes first and the adverb of manner comes second. We have not covered other types of adverbs as of now, so you need not worry about them. Just like in accusative, there are exceptions in dative as well. Some verbs are directly associated with indirect objects, since they practically cannot be associated with a noun or a pronoun as the direct object. The best example is the verb helfen. Think about it in English. We never say, I am helping something to someone, right? We say, I help someone, or I am helping someone. This someone is actually receiving your help, right? But is not part of the help itself. The thing that you are helping the person with is another thing altogether, which if you want to describe, you would say something like, I help someone with something. This sentence uses the preposition with, and we have not covered prepositions in German yet, so we will get into this in a future lesson. For now, you can just use helfen along with the dative case and forget about the thing that you will be helping that person with. So the use of helfen in German would be something like this. Nina hilft mir meaning Nina is helping me or Nina helps me. Ich helfe der Frau, meaning I help the woman or I am helping the woman. Note that Frau is originally feminine and it is actually die Frau, but since it is the indirect object in this case, die becomes der because of the dative. Danken and antworten are two more verbs that fall under this category. Wir danken einem Mann, meaning we are thanking a man or we thank a man. When you thank someone, you thank them for something. And again, for is a preposition that we will cover in a future lesson. Julian antwortet dem Bruder, meaning Julian is answering the brother or Julian is replying to the brother. What he replies or answers would be the second part of the sentence, which we will also cover in a future lesson. Now here's something I want you to try by yourself. I want you to translate the following sentence to German. Paul is selling the apple to the boy. So if the subject is Paul, the direct object, der Apfel, uses the accusative case, den Apfel, and the indirect object, der Junge, uses the dative case, dem Jungen. Notice how Junge becomes Jungen in the dative case. Does this sound familiar to you? Remember when we discussed the n declension or weak noun exception in the previous lesson? This exception applies for the dative case exactly like it does for the accusative case. Quick recap of the n declension. The exception only applies to some masculine nouns. It does not apply to feminine or neutral nouns at all. Masculine nouns ending with the letter E, many masculine professions ending with the letter T, and some other exceptional masculine nouns that we have not covered yet fall under this exception, and these are called weak nouns. The weak nouns we have covered so far are Junge, Kollege, Name, Vorname, Familienname, and Student. Weak nouns are denoted by a W in future vocabulary. I have explained it in great detail in the previous lesson, so I am not really going to get into it again. Some examples are Sie hilft einem Jungen, ich helfe dem Kollegen, ich helfe dem Studenten. I hope it's clear to you. If it's not, please make sure to watch L9 once again. In the previous lesson, we saw that plural nouns are unchanged in the accusative case, but they do change in the dative case. You have to add the letter N at the end of almost all the plural nouns when they are being used in the dative case. Here are a few examples. Die Briefe becomes den Briefen in the dative case. Die Sporte becomes den Sporten. Die Zwillinge becomes den Zwillingen. Die Kinder becomes den Kindern. This is true for all plural nouns except the ones that originally end with the letters N or S. For example, Autos, Sprachen, Studenten, Jungen, and so on. In this case, the plural nouns remain unchanged and only the definite article die becomes den. So die Autos becomes den Autos. Die Sprachen becomes den Sprachen. Die Studenten becomes den Studenten. Die Jungen becomes den Jungen, and so on and so forth. That's all for today's lesson. If you like our course, please make sure to like the video lessons and share the course with everyone who you think would be interested. Have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Until then, tschüss!